I got some people to actually watch the video this last week, and they gave me a lot of comments, and I thought I would try to do some improvements. First of all, my wife said that, you know, you're really excited and interesting to listen to, but when you're talking on the video, you're so boring. So I'm not sure that I'm not, you know, boring anyway, but I thought I would maybe try to be a little bit more excited. I don't know. I hope it doesn't come off as weird. Again, a reminder, you know, the reason I do this is because I'm totally fascinated with the news, and yet I'm surprised how much of the sameness I hear. See it in the New York Times, see it on CNN, even on Jon Stewart. And I thought there's got to be so much more interesting news out there. So out of the 15 news items I do here, you might want to ask yourself, how many had you heard or even seen? You know, I grabbed things that I hadn't seen anywhere else. You could always go and read what I'd written on kurtclement.com, and hope you enjoy the videos this week. The CDC, under Secretary of Human and Health Services Kathleen Sebelius, I cannot believe that they did this. This is so great, I think. But anyways, one of the things that the CDC wanted to do was emphasize emergency preparedness. And there's a lot of ways they could have done this, probably mostly very boring. But what they did was they created a graphic novel. A graphic novel, something like that you might see Batman or any of the other comic books out there. Anyways, they created this graphic novel, and the storyline, which I thought was very interesting, was about zombies. So this young couple are in this home, and all of a sudden, as they're checking their emergency preparedness, they get beset upon by zombies. Now, the funniest part, the part that just slayed me, is the first zombie that they run into is Mrs. Clements. You know, and I don't think that this lady looks at all like my mom, but it just slayed me. Now, of course, you can't go 100% all out, and at the very end of the graphic novel, I won't spoil it, but it ends up being a dream. But they did highlight some very important aspects of emergency preparedness. I don't know if they did it because of zombies are pretty popular right now, or if they did it because it's coming up on Halloween. I don't know. I thought it was fantastic. It's a 40-page graphic novel. Looks fantastic. You can download it and read the whole thing. I thought it was interesting. And, you know, if they get people to share it and talk about emergency preparedness, kudos to them. The Department of Homeland Security, under Janet Napolitano, under which FEMA falls. Now, there was a committee hearing in the Senate around the quality of service that FEMA was providing. I thought this was very interesting because the name of the committee, which was strange, the name of the committee was Is Quality Job Number One, which I think is horrible. First of all, it's a take on the old Ford commercials, which I'm not sure that emulating the Ford company is a good idea. Second of all, if you have to claim that quality is job number one, then you've already lost the battle. Obviously, it isn't job number one. But the funny thing was that the committee was a question. The name of the committee was a question. Is quality job number one? No one ever said, yes, it is. All it was a lot of talking about the changes that they've made. It was really interesting. You had the director of FEMA talking about all the changes and improvements they've made. You had this inspector general of the Homeland Security Department saying, hey, we asked them to do all these things, and, you know, very boring and dry, saying they did some things, but they didn't do them all. And then you had this guy from New Zealand, I'm not really sure what his role was, as a witness, saying, hey, I suggest you do some of these things. It was also very interesting to see the different philosophies, and yet the senators get along, unlike another committee meeting I watched, and I did watch the whole thing, you know, saying there are different philosophies. You know, the one philosophy from Senator Johnson was, look, I think these things would be better handled at a local level. They didn't answer that question, but he, you know, wanted to put that out there, and they did talk about it. Whereas you have the ranking chairman, because the chairman, who is a Democrat, because the Democrats control the Senate right now, he was mostly concerned about a couple, and this is tragic, a couple, I guess from his home state of Arkansas, had received money from FEMA because of a flood that had happened, and FEMA had came to them and said, look, you deserve this money, this is what the money is for, this is the money that FEMA is giving you to help fix up your home. Well, they fixed up the home. It was $27,000 or $37,000. 2 years later, when everybody is crying that, hey, FEMA wasted a lot of money, and they decide we need to crack down on these abuses, came back to them and said, you know what, we really shouldn't have given that money to you. Well, they already spent it, and they already fixed up their house, and you know, one of the suggestions that I really hope that they take up was, look, if FEMA makes a mistake, and gives people money because of their errors, then they ought to not try to recover it. Of course, everyone's saying they ought to try to recover everything. I don't agree with that. FEMA may be getting better, but FEMA is also getting bigger, and I think a good, solid question from the Republicans or the conservatives are, what is the role? Is every little disaster a federal disaster? And what is the role of the federal government versus the local government in these cases? I think it's a question that should be answered. I also think that the answer of is quality job number one never really got answered. They can do a better job. Of course, everyone was panicked post-Katrina, and everybody wants to try to do a better job. But the quality that they're talking about here is in dispersing the payments to the people who deserve it, whether they're vendors or individuals, and making sure that the government's money is not wasted. Housing and urban development under Sean Donovan. So they released a study, and guess what? Poverty makes you fat. Now, there's a lot of reasons for talking about this, but they did a study. They took a group of people, a cohort of, in 1995, and they said, you get Section 8 housing. Live where you want. Here's the Section 8 voucher. You get a voucher, same amount, but you have to live in this low poverty neighborhood. You can't live anywhere. You have to live in one of these neighborhoods. And then another group that they just left completely alone. And then after looking at it for several years, the New England Journal of Medicine was going to publish something, and this just came out, about some of the effects that they noticed. And one of the things is that those who lived in a low poverty or better neighborhood actually did not have the tendency to be obese or as fat as those who just lived in their regular neighborhoods or those who received no help at all. Fascinating. Not sure what policies or what you do on that, but it was very fascinating. I can tell you my heart goes out, though, to the people who received no help. We need a control group. Usually you worry about the people who are going to be experimented on, but the control group, it's like, we're not going to give you any help. We just want to see what happens there. I hope they discovered some other things like, yeah, we really should have helped you. But, I feel like these people should be talking to some rabbits saying, we understand, your problem with red eyes. Anyways, I thought this thing, the whole study was very interesting. I don't know what policies you might come out of this, but the fact that they would take the time to actually study this, maybe they discovered that, Section 8 housing, actually paying people vouchers, did no more good than having somebody who didn't receive vouchers. I don't know. Somebody should read the whole study and decide what it really says. The Interior Department, under Secretary Ken Saller, their national parks are free. Well, not really. They announced that the 2012 schedule for free days was now available. In fact, there's one whole week that is National Free Park Day. But the first date that comes up is over the Martin Luther King holiday. You can tell that a government organization did this because it wasn't like they said, hey, we're going to make the national parks free, and then, oh, by the way, it's Tuesday only, and you have to have a Saturday night stayover, which is what, the free market and companies would do. But they didn't do that. They said, here is 17 days throughout the year 2012 where going to a national park was free. Now, we went to Yosemite recently, and we paid $20 to get in. Not a real hardship for us, but I think encouraging everybody to take advantage of the national parks is a good idea because everybody shares in the expense. I did a quick calculation on the back of an envelope and said, based on the budget for the national parks and how many visitors there are, then our trip to Yosemite should have cost us $400. Obviously, we wouldn't have gone to the park if that's what it really cost. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has Standards Night for organic food. Okay, that's an obscure Mormon reference, but anyways, they're creating standards for what you can call organic foods. And actually, if you go on the website, you can actually, as a person from the public, offer comments. If you think, for instance, that organic food should be able to be zapped and microwaved and still call it organic, you ought to say so. If you believe that free-range chickens, only their eggs should be counted as organic, again, you can make those comments. Now, I can tell you that the agribusinesses and the farms are going to say, hey, we should be able to do anything we want and call it organic if, come on, seriously, we have no synthetic food. All food is organic. But anyways, you're going to have some farmers who specialize in organic foods who want to only call, no fertilizers, no pesticides, no water, no sunshine. I don't know what they're going to say. But there is going to be a night where they try to get together and decide what is organic food. Now, this is a good idea so that when you're going to the market and paying what I think are high prices for organic foods, you know actually what you're getting, and it's not just a meaningless label. I think it means a lot to people, and that having the USDA define what that means is a good idea. I'm surprised that we don't have this done already, since organic foods have been around for a while. But I think that if anybody really wants to comment and weigh in on this opinion, I really do think that they do listen. Because so the State Department with Secretary Hillary Clinton, you know, I can tell you this, the story is that GM has got to stop doing commercials about Detroit being a car town. Not that cars aren't made in Detroit, but I was reading about, you know, what she was doing, and she's actually in Tashkent, which is the capital of Uzbekistan, which is near Afghanistan, and there's a lot going on there in terms of, you know, how do we get things into Afghanistan. Right now, we do everything through Pakistan. Got a lot of issues with Pakistan. It's not feasible to go through Uzbekistan, but they were talking and saying, you know, here's our concerns, you know, and one of their concerns was, you know, what is your plan in Afghanistan? Are you going to leave a vacuum there and everything? But the thing that really caught my eye was that, and then it said the next day, Secretary Clinton will be visiting the GM plant in Uzbekistan. I thought, what the heck? There's a GM plant in Uzbekistan? Sure enough, in 2008, GM built a plant with, actually with their Korean counterpart, Daewoo, in their partner. They built a plant there in Uzbekistan. They employ a lot of people. Why aren't those jobs in the U.S.? I guess it's cheaper. I don't know. But we may actually see next year an M300, I believe, is the car that's coming out of GM. Kind of looks like a smash up between a smart car and a Mini. But anyways, built in Uzbekistan. Will we consider it a GM car? Will we consider it an American car? I don't know. Interesting question. And the fact that the Secretary of State is visiting that plant, very interesting. I would have loved to have heard more about that. The Transportation Department Secretary Ray LaHood announced his resignation and then went to Disneyland. Well, kind of. He went to Disneyland to go to the Disney World Motor Speedway. Didn't even know they had a motor speedway there, but they do. And there's a big conference there about technology in cars. Now, the whole idea is that cars would talk to each other. A GM car could talk to a Ford car or any foreign car. And so the whole idea is to experiment how this will work, and can people actually have technology that develops separately, installed separately, and talk to each other for things like crash avoidance, blind sides, and things like that. You know, eventually we're going to, you know, get to the point where the cars are going to drive themselves. But there's a lot of technology that can be put into cars that eventually will have to, you know, filter down to all cars. You know, you can imagine that you're driving a, you know, an old Mustang or something like this, and you know, you've got this new Mercedes driving up alongside it, trying to talk to it, going, hey, my driver's an idiot, watch out. And you know, the Mustang, of course, won't be able to talk to it. So here's an idea for somebody, you know, develop aftermarket items that could be installed in a Mustang that could talk to those cars. They're still trying to develop what they should talk about, but it was very interesting that they'd be down there talking about this sort of thing. The Treasury Department with Secretary Timothy Geithner. Now, there was a subcommittee hearing in the Senate that was very, very specific. You see, last year, really implementing this year, but anyways, last year there was a law passed that made available from the Treasury $30 billion to community banks for lending to small businesses. Okay, now, this committee was supposed to talk about, did we do a good job? What were the problems? What could we do better? You know, what was the result of that? Now, it was very interesting. The chairwoman of the committee, Senator Landrieu, I don't know where she's from, but she was fabulous. So she gives her little speech, turns it over to Senator Snowe, who is the ranking member, which is, you know, she's a Democrat, so the ranking member is a Republican. And Senator Snowe went off on her problems with the program. And then all the senators got to ask questions. And she was very good. First of all, she insisted that the record be made straight. So Senator Levine said, I can't believe people are complaining that it took too long for this to be implemented when you filibustered and it took us a year to get it passed. And the chairwoman says, well, it wasn't a year. We'll find out the exact time frame for the, you know, for the implementation, and we'll put that in the record. We don't want erroneous information in the record. And then you had somebody claiming, hey, I talked to this bank here, and they claim that this was a total boondoggle. You know, they quoted in the Wall Street Journal that it was a shell game. And then she said, well, I've got a letter from them saying how grateful they were that they were in the program, same bank, so I'm going to have one of my staff call and ask them what do they want in the record, their letter or the Wall Street Journal quote. I thought that was very, very, very professional of her. But the funniest thing was to see the cast of characters, and you had everybody there from Senator Paul, Senator Rubio, Senator Brown. It seemed to be a lot of these up-and-coming freshman senators there. And what they were doing is they were, you know, promoting their philosophy about, hey, look, the problem is, you know, regulations. Now, if they were on topic, that's what they were talking about. But mostly they would go off topic and they would be talking about everything from monetary policy and the Fed. And I was really impressed with Timothy Geithner. Now, you may not like how he's handling things at the Treasury, but I really like the way that he handled these senators and some of their questions and some of the things they talked about, especially as they got way off topic and were talking about things that had nothing to do with what was on this committee. I don't know if they were trying to score points or if they were trying to, create some video that they would use elsewhere, but there was a lot of it. And I think Timothy Geithner really held it up well, really answered the questions, really was straightforward, and talked about the jobs program, President Obama's proposals, and telling them that they ought to get it going. And then you had, Senator Paul Rand saying, Senator Paul. Anyways, Ron Paul's son, so I guess it's Senator Paul, saying, hey, I know that you're in favor of the Republican plan, and Timothy Geithner says, I doubt it. He says, well, you're saying that, raising taxes will kill jobs. We don't want to raise taxes. And he says, look, you have to have a balanced approach. He goes, I can't borrow $1 trillion to fund these programs. We don't want the deficits to go up, and yet we need to, do something to encourage jobs. And just cutting taxes may create jobs, but it takes too long. We need to do something now. I thought the discussion was very good. People had their positions and stuck to them. The young upstarts obviously stuck out. All the Republicans, really. I didn't see anything from the Democrats talking in this way that they were. So it was very, very fascinating to watch. And I think Timothy Geithner held his own. The Education Department, Secretary Arne Duncan. Now, $4 billion to the University of Phoenix? Really, $4 billion now. They're student loans. So, this is going to be paid back. And they will mostly be covered by the students. But, there were a lot of changes in the student loan program, also called Title IV. One of the things that I think is fantastic is they said, look, if you're a for-profit university, you have to provide us statistics telling us how students get gainful employment from this program. So, for instance, if you're going to say, hey, I've got this program, you ought to get a degree, you ought to take on student debt, they want you to be able to say eventually, and this is something that's slowly implementing, and there's a lot of rules and how-tos on this, but they want to say, look, you're going to enter this program, let's say it's computer programming. 90% of the people who start the program finish. That would be great. Everyone who finishes, the average debt that they take on is $50,000. And, 5 years after they leave the program, 50% of them actually have gainful employment. So, anyways, I think these kind of statistics and requiring this of especially the for-profit universities is a great idea. But there's a lot of things about what programs qualify, what don't, how do you define it, how do you report it, what is gainful employment. Not a simple thing to do, but I think worthwhile, and I think they're really working hard at it. If you look at the student loan program, there are a lot of schools, for-profit schools, that receive a large majority of the revenue from student loans. University of Phoenix is the biggest, and they get about 80% of the revenue from student loans. The quick glance, number one type of schools that receive money from student loans and a large part of the revenue, hair salons or hair schools. I don't know what to make of that. The Justice Department, with Attorney General Eric Holder, I looked on the FBI site, which is under the Justice Department, and found out that OMG stands for Outlaw Motor Gangs. So anyways, they released their annual report on gangs, and there really are basically three types. There's the street gangs, which is the most common. There is the prison gangs, and then there's these outlaw motorcycle gangs. My favorite gang, and let me see what it is here, the Wheels of Soul. They didn't mention Hell's Angels or anything that I recognized, but the Wheels of Soul I thought was one of the gangs that they mentioned that they had problems with. One of the problems with gangs in this assessment, it's an annual assessment to see, are gangs growing and what's going on, is that they're getting more sophisticated. They're doing more non-typical gang-related activities like smuggling in immigrants. They're also doing crazy stuff like committing crimes for other gangs to confuse the cops, because the cops will say, well, this is typically, the Sureños, when in reality it was the Juggalos. The Juggalos, that's a real gang? Really? Anyways, and they're in Utah. They're the ones who are committing the crime. Now, that alliance there is probably not real, but, those are the type of things that are happening. Gangs in every state even Utah. Probably Maine has the fewest. The Juggalos are in Maine, are in Utah, which I would be fascinated to know who those people are. But it's sad. The biggest problem, the biggest majority is in Southern California. Labor Department under Hilda Solis. Now, the Labor Department is responsible for a lot of statistics, and one of the statistics that they're responsible for is new applicants for unemployment insurance. This is, of course, obviously an indication of people who are coming on the unemployment rolls. Down from last week, down from last year. Seasonally adjusted looks better. Not a whole lot better. 6,000 under what was last week. It's several thousands over what was last year. It's not universal though. You have some states like Wisconsin that are definitely down, and you have some states like California that are actually up. So, interesting report. I would say overall it's saying that the economy is improving slowly, but it is improving. The Veterans Department with Secretary Eric Shinseki, really tough to get anything out of the Veterans Department. You know, it's really a matter of finding, The Veterans Department with Secretary Eric Shinseki. It's really tough to get anything out of the Veterans Department, and here we actually had several news items I had to actually pick. One of the things was that they decided to award the winners of a contest they had for innovation in veterans care. Some of them were really boring or obvious, like one said use debit cards instead of giving checks. But one I really liked was in Rhode Island, where it said that they would actually pay for internships, you know, post-college or post-education of whatever sort, pay for internships to give the veterans the actual experience and incent employers to employ them. I think this is a great idea. I think internships are huge because more than education, experience is a big deal. So anyways, they gave an award to 6 programs saying these are the most innovative programs that we ought to look at. And I thought that was very interesting. I would look into the programs if someone could and say, hey, here's a program and what it's actually doing. I really don't think that we can do too much for veterans who were injured in combat. The Energy Department with Secretary Stephen Chu. Now, I'm all for alternative energy, but this one is actually really great. I'm actually a big fan of hydroelectric, you know, dams. Well, imagine this. Fish-friendly dams. Well, you know, fish swim through dams, the turbines, they get chopped up, they get lost, they die. They tried to build fish ladders. They actually blew up some dams to allow the fish to go back and forth. Well, they've come out with this new turbine, which they tested and found out that 100% of the fish could go up and down the stream as they needed without being killed. They're a lot bigger, and there's some innovation in the design of the turbine, but if this is successful, and they're going to test it for about 3 years, it just came out, and if it's successful, they can actually build more dams. Dams really are, you know, solar energy at its finest. The sun brings the water up out of the ocean, carries it over to the mountains, dumps it on the mountains, and then gravity puts it back into the ocean. But that energy comes from the sun, bringing that water up there. The great thing about hydroelectric dams is they really have solved the problem of energy storage. They just store all that energy behind the dam until they need it. Transportation, and I talked a lot about this, the long transport transmission lines is a key part of this. But if we built more dams, I would certainly be happy about that. The Commerce Department. Now, I know I've talked about this before, but I have to mention that the acting secretary for the Commerce Department, Secretary Blank. Could you get a better name for an acting secretary? Secretary Blank has been, you know, holding down the fort, I guess, since May. In May, Gary Locke was asked to be the ambassador to China because John Huntsman decided to run for president. President Obama nominated John Bryson, who was president and CEO of Edison, which is the parent company of Southern California Edison, a huge utility, and was on the boards of Boeing and Disney. Seemed well-qualified businessman. One senator held up the nomination until just recently. Don't know what he got for it, but eventually the nomination went through, and he was allowed to be now the Secretary of Commerce. So welcome aboard, John Bryson.